Welcome to ShockOrama, your source for all things shock, schlock, and even just plain bizarre movies. I'm Ben Sherman, and for this channel's inaugural video, we are looking at the 1962 film Carnival of Souls, directed by Herc Harvey. Prepare yourselves for this spine-chilling story. The place is Lawrence, Kansas. The year? 1961. As of the previous year's census, the town has a population of just under 33,000. It's a typical Midwestern area. Some local places of note include the Reuters Organ Company, where beautiful pipe organs are assembled in their 48-foot-high assembly room. It is also home to Centron Corporation, a leading educational and industrial film production company. Centron had a reputation for producing high-quality films covering a variety of topics, including teaching aids, workplace safety, instruction for various skills useful at home, and even social guidance. Founded in 1947, they would see continued success with their films until the company folded in 1994. Perhaps Centron's most famous director, Herc Harvey first came to Lawrence in 1945 to study theater at the University of Kansas. After graduating, Harvey began teaching at the university and in 1950 got married. It was during this time, teaching and directing at the University of Kansas, that Harvey first became involved with Centron Corporation, appearing as an actor in several of their films. He soon began working as a director, writer, and producer for them, and would continue his successful career with Centron for over 3 decades. In 1961, Harvey was driving home from California, where he had just finished shooting a film for Centron. It was while he was driving through Salt Lake City, Utah, that he encountered something he couldn't believe: the ruins of Saltaire. Once home to the world's largest dance hall and sporting beautiful Moorish Revival architecture, it was now an empty shell, abandoned even by the shores of the Great Salt Lake it had been originally built over. The pavilion had a haunted look to it that stuck in Harvey's brain as he drove the rest of the way back to Lawrence. He knew he had to make a movie using that location. He also knew the movie had to feature a shot somewhere of ghoulish creatures rising from the water. With only these 2 ideas, Herc Harvey went to his friend and co-worker John Clifford to write a script. Clifford had never written a script before. He was an advertising copywriter for Centron. He had written a book, though, and Harvey had read the book and liked it. Over a period of 3 weeks, Clifford was able to write a first draft of the script during his free time. And with this draft, Harvey was able to raise a budget of approximately $30,000 through connections with local businessmen. Both men knew that they were far from Hollywood, but they were heartened by the fact that just a few years before, in Kansas City, Missouri, Robert Altman had filmed his own debut feature, The Delinquents. If he could do it out here in the Midwest, why couldn't they? Harvey set up a team of 6 crew members and took 3 weeks off of work to film. Sidney Berger, a graduate from the University of Kansas, was cast in the role of Mr. Linden. He also happened to be planning a trip to New York and agreed to find someone to play the lead role, since Herc Harvey was not able to make the trip himself. In New York, Berger was introduced through an agent to Candice Hilligoss, and quickly decided that she was perfect for the role. However, after Hilligoss arrived in Lawrence, Harvey said she, quote, looked and dressed like a flower child of the 60s, and she was very quiet and projected zilch, unquote. The director was even planning on telling Hilligoss she couldn't have the role anymore. But the next day, during test shoots, she was completely different, and she performed the role so well that Harvey was blown away. In interviews I found, Harvey was nothing but complimentary towards Hilligoss's acting abilities and said she was great to work with. Candice Hilligoss is a trained actress, and she studied under Lee Strasberg in New York. Her performance is what really makes this movie the cult classic that it has become. That said, I think it's time to start talking about the movie itself now. The movie starts with a drag race, and I already have a fun fact. The guy leaning out the window challenging these ladies to a race is production manager Larry Snegus, who was apparently at one point considered for the role of Mr. Linden before it was eventually given to Sidney Berger. If you look through the cast list and production credits, you'll see quite a few crew members appearing in small roles throughout the film. The drag race quickly goes wrong when the ladies' car gets pushed off the side of a bridge and into the river, but these ladies are kind enough to send up a title card as they're sinking. In real life, this car stunt almost went extremely badly. Harvey had to get permission from 2 separate counties to film the car crashing off the side of the bridge, and they agreed as long as he would pay for any repairs to the bridge. Amazingly, the repair fee only wound up being about $12, but after shooting the scene, Harvey noticed that there was a gas line under the bridge only about a foot away from where the car fell off. If the car had hit that on the way down, the repair bill would have been astronomically more expensive. After the opening credits finish, we see that a crowd of people is gathered to watch as the police try to fish the car out of the river. For some reason, I am absolutely obsessed with this old man just looking down into the river going, Through some sketchy ADR, we hear the man from the car claiming that he didn't push them off with his car, but why are you lying, man? We all saw you do it! We also learn that the car has now been underwater for more than 3 hours, with no sign of it or any of the women. There's a commotion, and we see that one of the women has emerged from the river, in the first of numerous beautifully eerie shots that made me fall in love with this movie. Herc Harvey described the decision to shoot in black and white as coming from a naive ambition for, quote, the look of a Bergman and the feel of a Cocteau, unquote. Personally, I think that the look and feel of Carnival of Souls is entirely its own, but I'd recommend anyone who's interested to watch Ingmar Bergman's Wild Strawberries and Jean Cocteau's Orpheus and Beauty and the Beast. All three of these films have a surreal, dreamlike quality to them that I agree makes them sort of spiritual precursors to Carnival of Souls. We learn that the lone survivor is Mary Henry, and she remembers nothing and offers no explanation for how she survived the crash. In the next scene, we see her playing an organ in the real-life Reuters Organ Company. This scene is very important to the movie because the Reuters Organ Company provided a visually impressive and cheap shooting location, and it's what gave Mary her vocation. If Saltaire is responsible for inspiring the entire movie, then the Reuters Organ Company is responsible for giving the movie its lead character. And I love it because it means we get to listen to Gene Moore's beautiful organ score throughout the film. Now, I looked high and low, but I found barely anything about Gene Moore. My only sources of information on him are his IMDb page, which only says that he died in 1998, and his Discogs artist page, which actually has some pretty interesting info about him. According to his Discogs page, his father was also an accomplished organist, and the two actually performed together for Kansas City audiences. It also says that he was the musical director for a large radio station, and in 1970 he released an album with his band, the Gene Moore Trio, which was titled The Big Band Sounds of the Gene Moore Trio. The page provides no sources for any of this information. The only reason why I believe he did in fact release an album in 1970 is because a single song from it exists online, uploaded to YouTube in 2021. Please, for the love of God, I am begging you, if anyone has a copy of this album, or if you can get your hands on a copy and then rip it to MP3, upload it to YouTube or somewhere in its entirety, please, I don't have much money, but I need to hear the rest of this album. It sounds fantastic. This scene at the organ factory is also the first time that the movie's interesting religious themes are brought up. Mary reveals that she has just been hired to play organ at a church in Utah, but she just considers it a job and is not herself religious. The man she's talking to warns her that this is not the best attitude for someone going into church work, but Mary just shrugs it off and leaves, ominously saying that she will never return.
Mary, it takes more than intellect to be a musician. Put your soul into it a little, okay?
As Mary drives out of Kansas, she's listening on the radio to some whimsical, happy music. But as night falls, her radio seems to malfunction, and no matter which channel she turns to, she can only hear Gene Moore's eerie organ score. I guess it's not for everyone. In the distance, she sees the dark shape of a strange building, played by the aforementioned abandoned Saltaire. Then she sees the ghoulish face of a man peering at her through the passenger's side door window. And when she speeds up to get away, she suddenly sees him on the road in front of her, which causes her to freak out and drive her car off the road and into a ditch. This ghoul, referred to in the credits simply as The Man, was played by director Herc Harvey, and I found some really great footage of him in the face paint and the costume again for a retrospective documentary in 1989 celebrating the film's theatrical re-release that year. Mary soon arrives at her rooming house, where we meet her host and my favorite character in the movie, Miss Thomas. Her performance throughout the movie is so campy and adorable. I am just obsessed with her.
I ain't one to make a fuss about a thing like that.
As she's unpacking in her bedroom, Mary sees the man again, staring at her from outside the window. But he pulls a Michael Myers and vanishes, so she just chalks it up to her imagination. The next day, Mary meets her new boss, the minister of the church she will be playing at. He wants to set up some kind of reception so that she can meet the rest of the congregation, but she coldly declines.
Couldn't we just skip that? Skip that?
The minister is visibly thrown off by her spiritual and social aloofness, but as soon as she starts playing, he has what I can only call an appropriate reaction to listening to the Carnival of Souls soundtrack. Have I mentioned how much I love the music in this film? Mary continues playing as he leaves, and below, the man appears once again, listening to her music. The minister goes back when she suddenly stops playing and finds her staring at a stained glass window depicting church icons. When he asks her what she sees, she replies, nothing at all. I originally wasn't even going to mention this moment, but after rewatching the movie so many times for this video, it stood out to me as a moment that was important for the religious themes that I've already brought up. I couldn't find any interviews with John Clifford or Herc Harvey directly mentioning this, but I think it is interesting to watch this film through the lens of Mary Henry being an atheist in small-town religious America. More on that later. The minister invites Mary on a drive with him, and Mary asks if they can go see the Saltaire Pavilion. Mary wants to go inside, but the minister refuses, saying that it is dangerous and it would be unseemly for a minister to break the law. As they drive away, we see the man watching their car from a window inside Saltaire. Back at the rooming house, Mary takes a bath and we finally get to meet Mr. Linden, who is an absolute slimeball. She invites him in when he knocks, thinking he's Miss Thomas, but then he proceeds to force his way in, even though she's clearly uncomfortable with his presence and is only wearing a towel. Sidney Berger gives a great performance as the slimy John Linden, adding a more grounded form of horror as we see Mary struggle through her discomfort around him. After Mr. Linden leaves, Mary follows him into the hallway, but then sees the man at the bottom of the stairs and runs back into her room. Miss Thomas walks into the room and just her reaction to Mary's strange behavior and locking the door is just mwah. Mary asks her who the man in the hall was, but Miss Thomas insists there's no one in the house besides the two of them and Mr. Linden. Miss Thomas offers Mary some coffee as long as it won't keep her awake. Mary insists it will not keep her awake, and then cut to Mary a couple hours later, laying awake in bed. What a relatable queen. The next morning, John Linden is back and he's brought coffee. He's being a bit less creepy this time, so we got to learn a bit of his backstory, that he's a factory worker, and he's a bit of an alcoholic.
Come on, what do you think, I'm an alcoholic?
Yes, you are, John.
When he learns that Mary plays organ for church but isn't religious, he is shocked. On his way out, we learn that he does not wash his coffee mugs. Gross.
Well, thank you for the coffee. It was unsanitary, but delicious.
Gross!
Mary has the day to herself, so she decides to go clothes shopping. The crew apparently shot this scene in the department store guerrilla style, literally just offering one of the actual workers there $20 to appear in 2 shots. This is also where the movie really starts to turn into a Twilight Zone episode. A liquid effect washes over Mary in the changing room, and when she gets out, she discovers that no one can see or hear her. She runs outside and realizes that she can't hear anything either. This bizarre experience ends when she leans against a tree and suddenly hears birdsong. Now, I couldn't find any references to this specifically, but this physical connection with nature almost feels like a nod to the French short film An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which aired in the US as an episode of The Twilight Zone. The short film, based off a story of the same name by Ambrose Bierce, was referenced by Herc Harvey and John Clifford as an inspiration during their scriptwriting process for Carnival of Souls. Throughout the short film, there are lots of shots of nature used as a symbol of life and freedom, which makes the use of the tree and birdsong in Carnival of Souls interesting to me, since that's what brings Mary back to the real world. Mary stops to take a drink of water at a fountain, but she gets freaked out when she thinks she sees the man. It turns out not to be her ghoulish pursuer, but this man has the most bizarre presence and line delivery, so I really do not blame her for running away.
I didn't mean any harm. I just stopped to get a drink.
She happens to run right into a doctor who insists on taking her to his office so that he can write down a full report of her strange experiences. The doctor suggests that the man is merely a figment of Mary's imagination, brought on by the trauma of the car accident, which, you know, it's a valid theory, but he just comes across as so condescending when he's explaining it to Mary that I just cannot help but roll my eyes every time I see this scene. Mary tells the doctor that she has no interest in a boyfriend, and he's shocked to hear this. I've been going out of my way to mention all of these moments of Mary revealing that she has no interest in human companionship or spiritual fulfillment because I think it's a major theme of the movie. It's also interesting to note that in almost every instance of this, It's a man with a position of power over her that Mary's talking to. Mary decides to visit the abandoned pavilion on her own in an attempt to make the terrifying vision stop. This is one of my favorite sequences in the film because the abandoned Saltaire was just such a beautiful location to shoot at, and the crew really took advantage of the scenery. Saltaire was first constructed in 1893 and was partially owned by a corporation associated with the Mormon Church. It burned down in April 1925, but was rebuilt and expanded. It became primarily known for its massive dance hall and hosted many of the great traveling bands of the day. However, over the next decade, fewer and fewer people visited the site due to changes in traffic routes and fluctuating population sizes in surrounding towns. And in 1933, the shore of the Great Salt Lake receded dramatically, leaving the building literally high and dry. Saltaire was finally closed and abandoned in 1958, which is the state the film crew founded in 1961. Amazingly, most of the electrical wiring and light bulbs still worked, so the film crew was able to use all the original lights while shooting the movie. This apparently freaked out a bunch of the locals who hadn't seen any of the lights on for several years, so quite a few panicked phone calls were made to the police about suspicious activity happening at the old Saltaire building. Once Mary returns to the rooming house, Mr. Linden asks her to dinner. She's hesitant at first, but she eventually agrees, realizing that she's more scared of being alone that night than she is of being with Mr. Linden. She agrees to meet him in a couple hours after she finishes practicing organ at the church. At the church, Mary begins falling into a trance-like state and starts playing music that I would describe as creepy ghost carnival music. And then she starts having hallucinations of the man approaching her in the Saltaire dance hall. She's stopped by the minister, who calls her playing profane sacrilege! And then he fires her, calling her soulless. She goes to dinner with Mr. Linden, where he gets angry at her for being disinterested in him and is just generally unpleasant and manipulative the whole time. He eventually convinces her to go back to the rooming house with him in the most threatening way possible.
You know, my room's only a couple of feet from yours. Ain't likely to get very far from me, are you?
Once in Mary's room, Mr. Linden starts getting real pushy. And when Mary looks up into the mirror, instead of Mr. Linden behind her, she sees the man, which sends her into a full-blown panic attack. Mr. Linden makes it clear that he's not into this at all, and he leaves real fast, leaving Mary alone to start pushing furniture around in an attempt to barricade herself in. I really love this shot from outside where you just see her through the window. It's such a classic and menacing shot. The next morning, the doctor comes down from visiting with Mary and gets into a conversation with Miss Thomas, who has been quite disturbed by Mary's strange behavior and is hoping that she'll leave soon. Mary packs her bags and leaves in a near catatonic state, not reacting at all to Miss Thomas on her way out. As she's driving, her car starts making weird noises, so she's forced to see a mechanic. As she waits in the car, we see the silhouette of the man enter the shop, and so Mary runs from the car. She goes to a bus station, only to find that once again, no one can see or hear her. She tries getting on a bus, but she gets chased off by a pack of ghouls and their extremely unnerving laughter. Mary continues running, until the episode ends when she leans against a tree and hears birdsong, just like the last time. She decides to go straight to the doctor's office in search of help. The doctor has his back turned as Mary explains her predicament to him. And when he turns around, it's not the doctor, but the man. Mary wakes up back in her car at the mechanic's shop, revealing it was all just a dream. Or was it? Mary drives back to Saltaire, where we are treated with more gorgeous cinematography of the abandoned building. She encounters a large group of ghouls dancing in the dance hall. The man dances towards her with his partner, and Mary sees that it is a ghoulish version of herself. She flees and is chased by the ghouls down onto the sand, where she falls and they close in on her, in a shot that I find quite similar to some shots of the zombies in Night of the Living Dead, which would be filmed just 6 years later. The doctor, the minister, and a police officer follow Mary's tracks in the sand the next morning, and we see that she mysteriously disappeared after collapsing, no footprints leading away. Back in Kansas, the car from the beginning of the film is finally pulled out of the river, and there sits Mary's body with her two friends, still inside. And that is how this movie ends. This film grew on me a lot, even while I was just rewatching it to make this video. The first time I tried watching it, I stopped about 15 minutes in because I just wasn't vibing with it. My one complaint, which I've seen other people also share, is that the pacing in this movie can be very slow. It's definitely a slow burn movie, and when you combine that with the sometimes amateur production elements and the uneven performances from pretty much everyone besides Candice Hilligoss and Sidney Berger, I can understand why a lot of people don't like it. But it definitely got better with each watch, and especially once I started doing research to learn more about the people who made this movie and why they made it, it became a much more interesting and enjoyable experience for me. The main thing that stood out to me after repeated viewings was the strange religious themes, which I've been trying to point out throughout this video. It gradually occurred to me just how isolated Mary is throughout the movie. She just interacts with the bare minimum number of people to get through her days. She only interacts with John Lyndon because he literally forces himself into her life. She never instigates any of their conversations. This lack of social interest seems to be connected with her lack of spiritual interest. We see her flatly decline a social invitation to meet the congregation of the church she works at, the same church that she also says in the movie she only sees as a place of business. As I said earlier, I like to interpret this as the story of an atheist in a religious world. The first time we see Mary, she's engaging in a dangerous drag race, activity which goes against societal laws and could also be interpreted as sinful. This activity also kills her, both literally and in a social societal sense, since it could be interpreted as a metaphor for Mary's perceived sinful nature, causing her to be socially ostracized. Perhaps this is the reason why she's so eager to leave her hometown after the crash. Ultimately, this is all just my own theorizing because I think it's fun to analyze movies like this. In every interview that I found, Herc Harvey said that nearly every decision made during filmmaking was motivated by the need to get the scene done as efficiently as possible, or because it just felt right in the moment. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. This has been a real passion project of mine, and I've got a lot of very interesting movies lined up for the future. So if you're into this kind of analysis of obscure old movies, feel free to like and subscribe. Until next time, stay weird.